Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will be continuing our discussion of Are You Prepared? The Masonic Last Request by Worshipful Brother Joeseph Koty.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, first of all, I'm back. We're here to discuss the previous episode's discussion with Worshipful Brother Nathan Davis on the Masonic Last Request by Worshipful Brother Joeseph Koty. I'm Matt Appel, and I'm the prodigal son of podcast hosts here who has finally returned. And I'm down here in the great state of Washington, along with very worshipful Brother David Colbeth. And we also have from the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and Yukon, Worshipful Brother Stephen Chung and Worshipful Brother Jarrod Dunham. And it's good to see you guys all again. And I very much appreciate, I had to take some time to deal with a variety of family issues. And I appreciate you guys keeping up the slack. And that said, I sort of am going to punt to you.
Tonight we're short our net.
That's all right. We got a little bit of Steve's trying to catch up on past shows there, apparently.
I'm glad you know
that's why our ratings are so good. We all let the shows play in the background.
I'm glad to know nothing has changed since I left.
It's great to see you back, Matt, by the way, and glad everything's working out. So
yeah, welcome back. And we really didn't cover for you. We just didn't do any of the things that you do while you were gone. So those jobs are still, piling up for you,
That means you realized how useless I truly am. So
yeah. Don't watch any of the shows to where Matt.
and I actually wasn't trying to watch the show. I had already watched it. I was bringing up the message that is written in our in the post on the YouTube page, and so because it's right there, it's easy, and why not? It's convenient. I think it was a great show. It's too bad that you guys weren't able to be there for it. We had a pretty good conversation. Totally enjoyed it. He was 3 or 4 hours ahead of us, right? So it was a late night for him, but he said he'd come back anytime. So we'd be able to get him back on and ask him some more further deeper questions, if you will, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it'd be great to get him back and talk with him about who he is and ask him a little bit more about the message. I think if there's some, we're obviously going to talk about what our feelings are and our thoughts are. I apologize. I wasn't able to make that meeting, but in our chats, we've felt like this particular message and the way Nathan delivered it for sure, and the conversation you had and he delivered was something of value that we should be talking about as Masons. And go ahead.
It was interesting because it was he was really trying to share a message from a brother who was getting ready to pass and wanted to share a message with the world, really. And as far and wide as he could spread it, right? Which the message was good and consistent. But I think one of the things that we touched on in the green room there was how it's more really interesting about the story of how that came to be. That was really touching, if you will, right? Had more meaning and depth to it than just the message itself, right? The brother who did that, Nathan Davis, he was raised in 2016. In 2019, he's worshipful master of his lodge, just pre-pandemic, and then everything kind of goes haywire. And he ends up meeting a past master of the lodge through making contacts with the membership. And who'd have thought that that one call that would have such an impact on somebody's life, but he did, and he had this bond with the fellow, and he asked him to, help him write this message and convey this message to people, and this brother did that and honored every other message or every other request of this elderly brother as well. He asked that he be visited on a regular basis, that he set up a certain things, and he did that. He did everything the guy asked of him, which was pretty cool. And then he was on our show to convey this message again. And it's really a consistent message, as Brother Dunham had noted. It's a really consistent, good message for everybody to receive. So I'm glad we were able to be part of that.
Well, I really liked right from the beginning. There's so many layers in the conversation that you had with him, not just the message from Worship Brother Joeseph, but also in Nathan's discovery of the process and becoming an officer and going through the process, like you're talking about, having to, first of all, being a really new Mason. We were kind of talking to the green room about that. We have some questions about that. We'll be curious to hear what Nathan, what's happening with the lodge. We just came off a series talking about membership and retention and engagement, and now we've got this guy that's barely 2 years to 3 years as a Mason, and he's going to become worshipful master. So there's some questions that will hopefully get answered from Nathan about that. But what struck me was he took the initiative to make the calls, whether somebody gave him that advice or he just did it on his own. We don't know that yet, but he made the calls to the members of the lodge. And I remember him saying in the notes that, well, he's got worship brother after his name. He must know what he's doing. And so he called him up, and Brother Joeseph answered, and he asked him, and he heeded the call. That was what I got out of that piece of it, was that as a brother, Worship Brother Joeseph said, yes, this is my master, making the call, pulling on my cable toe. And he had the opportunity. He had enough slack in his cable toe that he could take the opportunity to come back and be part of the lodge. And so, again, I'd be curious to know if Nathan knows anything about that history. Why did Brother Koty depart from the lodge? Was it just happen? I mean, sometimes we drift away from lodge, or was it something that maybe happened and now he's heeding the call because, hey, there's this new guy and he's willing to revive the lodge and get things going again, or what's happening there? So I'd be curious to hear about that. But again, it struck me that here's an example of, the story revolves around Worship Brother Koty, but here's an example of a Mason, past master, who knows how long ago it was past master, and the new guy calls him up and says, hey, would you come and be part of lodge? And he says, yes. He just does it. It's not, oh, I'm too busy or I've got this going on. Who knows what is happening with Worship Brother Koty's life? It could be lots of stuff happening, but he still heeds the call and comes back to the lodge.
Yeah, I think the important thing, I shouldn't say the important thing, the main thing I took out of this episode was the fraternal bonds that develop, in this case, quite quickly within members of a lodge that I don't see happening as often in in society outside of lodge. I mean, how many of us have friends that we've barely know that we would go this distance for some of these requests for? It's just, I'm always blown away by the bonds that we form so quickly within lodge among members that we would normally not have any association with.
Yeah, like if it wasn't for all the time I spent visiting with you, I would never have thought that. But if you asked, I'd be there for you. I do those types of things, right? And it's you're right. It does take a certain bond with that really is not formed everywhere and with everyone either, right? So that's something else entirely. But
and not only bond, but the commitment to each other. Later in the show, he talks about how some guys are just lodge masons. They're masons while they're at the lodge and in the meeting, and they do what they're supposed to do, whatever. But as soon as they leave, you know, the closing charge in a lodge isn't meant to release you from your duties. it's meant to bind you, essentially, or remind you that, hey, as you're leaving this lodge, at least you're leaving this sacred retreat, as we call it in the United States, of friendship and brotherhood, that you take with you these tenets and things out into the outer world. And so he talks about how a lot of guys are just lodge masons, and that he was talking with, was it the current Grandmaster or one of the, I don't remember who it was.
Current
Grandmaster was saying that he's a 3 a.m. Mason. And he kind of smirked, saying, yeah, he knows what the answer was. But what do you mean 3 a.m.? He said, well, if you can call me at 3 a.m., I'll be there for you. And he replied, well, I use a 24/7 Mason, and kind of shot back with the Grandmaster.
Right.
And he'll be there for all the time. And so, yes, that's something to say about who we are as Masons, that we'll be there for you. But, you know, Jarrod was commenting in the green room about that.
Well, part of the umbrage that I took with that was the fact that Freemasonry isn't all about service. And so I always get upset. Like, there are, like, when we talk about the lodge Masons, we don't know that they don't do anything outside of lodge. Like in Stephen's and the work that Stephen and I do, education is actually forefront over service. That, you know, it says right in the opening, one of the first things the master says to a new candidate is that Freemasonry exists to make us wiser, better, and consequently happier. So I always find that you have to be careful when you're saying to someone they're not practicing Freemasonry outside of the lodge, if you're studying something, reading, like, service isn't the only thing that we do, and we need to be careful not to put too fine a point on the fact that with the people that do that, although it's the most obvious thing that we do, it's not the only thing that we do.
Yeah, good. Well said. Well said. There's a lot of truth to that.
So that was my only thing with the 24/7, is that I consider myself a 24/7 Mason, but not because I'm constantly, someone calls me at 3 a.m, I may be a little bit grumpy about them calling me, and I will help them. But there are other things that I do with my time that don't necessarily involve being of service to someone else.
Right. Which totally, I get that. And that's why I never really considered myself a 24/7 Mason, because I have lots of other things on the go. Right. Though my wife would consider me a 24/7 Mason, because that's all she sees is, me going off to lodge. Right.
Buying shirts.
Buying shirts. And man, I got so many different Masonic shirts, they're all logoed. Yeah. And yet I need another one. So, hey, anybody sees another good design, put it in front of me. Okay.
Well, and Most Wishful Jim, we had him on the show recently, and I think it was in the green room, he was talking about how, and he's told me this separately, that what we do here, not to pat ourselves on the back and not to whatever, but the idea of what we do here is essentially like a 24-hour Mason idea. It's not that we're trying to promote ourselves or be better, whatever. It's just we have too much to say sometimes and want to tell everybody about it. But I think by bringing on the guests, I think that fills a unique role in that we try to provide an avenue for these folks to deliver their message and talk about them and not so much us. So we were just talking the other day, one of the last shows, we said, we've never done a show about ourselves. And that's the whole idea. I mean, it's to some extent, it's not about ourselves. I mean, I like Steve's idea. I think it was Steve who mentioned that. And I like the idea of at some point we probably should do a self-interview of each of us. I think that, but it's not about us. It's about getting the message of Masonry out and about, and so if I would say, if someone Mason has a desire to get them to do something more, do a podcast, get involved in your lodge, take over the education, give some kind of little message. I was at a lodge recently, and it was interesting to see several guys standing around joking and talking while 2 or 3 guys were scurrying around and doing all the work, getting ready for the degree. And I thought, I get, people haven't seen each other, but come on, open your eyes and look around and start helping. And so there's opportunity to be of service and to be of knowledge and strength and support to your lodge and to your community and to other areas too, but even within your lodge.
Right. And we are not a service-based organization. Right. But being of service to our brothers should be something that we all strive to do all the time. And so I think that was, part of his message in what he was doing, was being just being that brother who's helping this guy out, right? There was nothing really in it for himself. It was just a request of an old past master that he had gained some respect for, right? So, the message, it's his continuous love of the craft made him the man that he is today. That's when you choose a lifestyle, right? That lifestyle does tend to define you. And I can't think of many better things to help define me than the finer points of masonry, right? So I think that's pretty, it's something that I hope every Mason gets to say, that they put in and they got out and it made them the man they are today, right?
And I would say too, at one point he talks about just before he delivers the message in the video, he talks about the request, as you alluded to, Steve, that where worship brother Joeseph asked him to come to the hospital, and he jokes that he kicked his wife out of the room. I thought that was funny. And but he could be just he and Nathan talking. And then he went through his specific requests of what he wants him to do, and how he wants him to carry his ashes, and how he wants him to pray and give his last rites, basically, of the Jewish faith. When he's not, Brother Koty wasn't Jewish; he's Protestant, he said, but worship brother Nathan is Jewish, and so he wanted him to do that, and to have all the guys come together, all the brothers come together from all his various organizations and toast him. And so it was a pretty extensive request. And so I was thinking about that. Gosh, are we ready as Masons or individual, whether you're a Mason or not? If you happen to be listening to this and you're not a Mason, as just a person, as a son, brother, father, uncle, cousin, grandpa, whatever, Mason, are you ready? Do you have your last will and last requests kind of laid out? Do people know what you want to have done? Now, it's not meant to have levity here, but we won't be there, so it won't really matter, right? It's not for us. I was at a memorial today, and it was reminded, the person said, the person that had passed, they were talking before, similar circumstance where they said, well, what do you want? And they said, well, it's not, I'll be gone. It's not for me. And the person that was talking to him said, yeah, you're right. It's for us. It's for us. It's not for you. It's for us. And so what do you want the people that hopefully memorialize your life? What would you want them to say or do or whatever? And maybe that's having a drink. Maybe that's dancing. Maybe that's nothing, who knows? And Masons, we have a pretty unique opportunity to have a specific funeral process. And,
it's interesting you say that with respect to it. It's quite often perceived that, the impact you had on the world is shown by the number of people that show up to your funeral, right? Or your celebration of life. And it's like, And there's a lot of Masons in the Valley. So, when a Mason dies and lots of people show up, it's perceived that, that there's a well-liked guy there, right? And I think that in the funerals or the services that I've gone to, it still speaks true. It's not just that he was part of a big organization, but most of the people there, like, I mean, the lineup of people that wished to speak at these things was incredible every single time. And of course, you have to cut the line off somewhere, or you'd be there all day, right? And so it's kind of cool the way we have our ceremony and a Masonic ceremony, and we don't get to spend a lot of time. We just drop our sprigification and have a thought and go, right. So it is. I don't know, when it comes to the services, man. It's one of those things that I wish that I could orchestrate my own service, right? And I guess you could, but I think it's so cool that when we ask for Masonic service, somebody puts it together and everything's taken out of your hands. So you don't really get control of anything, right? But I don't know. I went off on a tangent there. I've been to, unfortunately, too many Masonic funerals, and they're all very touching, and there's so many thoughts running around my head thinking about, the messages that are always delivered at these things. Yeah, sorry, guys. No,
That's all right. And I would agree. I reflect back to some past Grand Master I was talking to that was describing a situation where it was a little bit similar to Worship Brother Koty, and that he knew he was terminal. And so he was integral part of the Grand Lodge. I think he was on the trial committee, and he was being a member of different committees, and he was pretty intricate in the running of Grand Lodge functions and his lodge and other things. And so he actually took the time to not only figure out what he wanted for his memorial service, and of course his family, hopefully, obviously, was all taken care of, but then he moved on to the masonry stuff, and this is what I want to have happen. This is who I'd like to have do it if they're alive. Hopefully, somebody else didn't happen, but here's a list of guys I'd like to have it done. I don't want anybody to read out of a book. They memorize it or they don't do it. And then it went on from there. He had actually found a replacement for all of his positions as well, and trained them up and taught them what was next. And so again, you could have multiple levels, multiple layers of preparedness in the idea of this process. Now, of course, if you go quickly there, you can't control that, but it also can teach us that maybe along the way, we should be planning for that, because you don't know. I used to jokingly say, well, if I got hit by a bus, now I say, if I moved to Hawaii, if I just decide to move to Hawaii tomorrow, what would happen? And
you join Kona Lodge and gain.
There you go,
because they have a big feast at every meeting.
And so I was reflecting earlier this week that I had not done a very good job. Now we have a meeting, but I had not done a very good job of training the guy below me. I'm a senior deacon again, and so my junior deacon, I texted him, apologized, and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, I've not done a very good job. But here, over the next 3 months, 4 months, let's really dig in and figure out to make sure you're ready for January, assuming we're back in lodge still by January and things don't go the opposite direction." But
yeah, well, maybe we'll get to be back in lodge in January. We're still on hold, so yeah.
Well, the last thing I would like to talk about, if we got a few more minutes here, was this piece reminds me of, I think it was Jarrod was talking about how is it for us? I'm sorry, it's the service to the people and spiritual craft, but really I saw in Brother Nathan, that he was getting out of it as much or more than he was giving out if they're providing service. And one of the things he talked about was the morning he had organized the morning fellowship while Brother Koty was in the hospital, and that he had guys all arranged. It sounded like kind of maybe an informal festive board kind of layout where they're in a U-shaped thing, and they'd wheeled Worship Brother Koty around the corner, and there's all the guys there waiting for him, and he rapped the gavel. And I was curious, what's the sign of, I know you probably can't give it to me, but the sign of fidelity, that's an interesting, I haven't heard that before. So now I'm curious what that is. Maybe we need to talk about it afterwards. Okay. Is it kind of like the DMLA? Okay. We'll cut that piece out. Okay.
It's actually so at my lodge, we do an outdoor meeting every year. And because it's actually not possible for us to no longer find a place to meet that can't be seen by someone somewhere,
Yeah.
right? Now we just give the sign of fidelity.
Gotcha.
And that's putting your hand over your heart, right? And that's what we're allowed to do in public now.
Gotcha. So it really struck me that was he put that together, and then they had their event or their discussion or meal or whatever they were doing, and then later he said that Worship Brother Koty was taken aback. He just was overwhelmed that these guys would do that for him. And again, it reminded me, first, of course, we need to do that for our own guys. We should be going and visiting some of these guys that are incapacitated, that can't come to lodge. We should go and take lodge to them. I think it was one of your guys from Canada. We've interviewed so many people now, I can't think of who it was exactly, but they had said they have taken lodge to the Mason at his house and done him like a mini lodge at his house.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, that's such a great idea. Even if you just had 3 guys, it just take 3 guys to open lodge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even if you just had 3 guys and brought it there and talk with him, what an amazing, and you would get as much or more out of that than that person receiving it. And so, yes, while it was meant for Worship Brother Koty, that event, really, Nathan, and I'll bet if you were to ask any of those guys that were there that day, I'll bet their hearts were full. I can't imagine they weren't.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. We should be keeping in touch with our senior members more. You know, I make a pretty good effort to keep in touch with the senior members that I know. And there's a couple other past masters that do the same. We unfortunately don't have a lot of widows anymore to look after and whatnot, but we do take great pride in keeping in touch with our senior members and making sure they get out to the annual barbecues and things that they can. It's hard for them to get out to evening events now, but you know, yeah, it's a good point though. Very good point you made.
You know, we didn't kind of skipped over too was that he alluded, and Brother Nathan alluded to, that Worship Brother Koty, as soon as he accepted the call to be part of the team, he immediately referred to him as Worshipful Master. And he said that was the title. So he gave him the respect of the office and the respect of the title. And I thought that was a really neat moment too. And it took, I don't know when it happened for me, but I noticed and have tried to make the commitment too, that as soon as a guy is installed and he takes his oath, he takes his obligation, and he's seated in the chair and he's now the master, his name is now Worshipful Master, basically. Mm-hmm. And it is a difference. And same thing, like when you first become a Mason, you become Mr. and then they become brother. And there's that title change. And it's subtle, but it's a significant change. And the respect for the office and respect for the organization is important too.
Yeah, it's actually funny. My Worshipful Master, every time I see him, I make a point of, Worshipful Master, how may I serve you today? Right? When he phones, every time he calls, Worshipful Master, I am trying to get as many Worshipful Masters in as possible, right? Because he's the longest running Worshipful Master now for 3 years, right? And he doesn't, he's not getting greeted in lodge. He's not getting, so I make a point of that. And, it's just my district deputy grand master. District deputy grand master, how may I serve you today? Right? When I answer their call or meet them in person. And it's great when you go to the Worshipful Master's place of business and you walk in the door and there's other people around. Worshipful Master, how may I serve you? Right? It's just priceless, right? But giving him that recognition and that title while he's there, yeah. And I make a point of it.
Well, it's something, unfortunately, that we don't get much outside of Lodge. I mean, I can remember when I joined Lodge, because it was my father's lodge. I knew a bunch of the members already, and they were always Mr. Whatever. I was always raised that I called anyone that was my parents' age or older was Mr. and Mrs. something or other. And the hardest thing for me was when I was raised and having to call them brother. And it does, it promotes the fellowship that we want, but it's also something like we don't, very rarely do we go out and hear someone refer to, I almost never have someone come up to me and say, "Oh, Mr. Dunham," or any, so it's, there is that, it is a sign of respect, and it's a sign of respect that we don't see very much outside of Lodge. And I think that's another reason why people enjoy going to Lodge, is that a Mason knows that when they go into Lodge and they're put into a position like Worshipful Master, that 9 times out of 10, if they make a request, the person they were making that request to will do their best to help them fulfill it, without making the Worshipful Master feel like they have asked too much. And I felt, Brother Nathan is way better person than I am, because listening to the request that Worshipful Brother Koty made of him, I'm like, wow, you guys have a very, very special relationship, that not only did Worshipful Brother Koty feel comfortable enough to make these requests. These are very personal requests of someone who he's known a very short time, but that Worshipful Brother Nathan was willing to fulfill these. I mean, that to me makes me proud to be a Mason, to know that there are other Masons out there like that.
Yeah, for sure. But it goes to show that bond is there, and you never know who it's you're going to connect to, right? Brother Jerry Bladler, he doesn't come to Lodge anymore, but I had built such a connection with him several years ago, right? And by sitting at the festive boards and just chatting with him, and he always made a point of talking to me and finding out how I was doing. And not just, "Hey, how you doing?" and you carry on, shake your hand, and carry on to the next conversation. He made time to stay there and talk to you, right? And so we ended up forming this connection. And I phone him probably 2-3 times a month to check in on him, because I know he doesn't come out and he can't. It's, he's a guy I would do that type of thing for in a heartbeat. But the difference is, it took time of a greater length of time for us to build that kind of bond that these two built in such a short period of time. But one of the amazing things about Masonry.
Indeed, it is. The bond between brothers it's a crazy thing. Sometimes it happens right away, and sometimes it takes a while. And with that, I'd like to thank you guys for continuing our conversation of our last episode with Brother Joeseph Koty's last requests. And on behalf of Very Worshipful Brother David and Worshipful Brothers Stephen and Jarrod and myself, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again soon on the Working Tools Podcast.